Hello, I'm going to be talking about social work values. So if you try and find an exact thing around what social work values include online, it's actually quite difficult because people say all different things. But I really resonate with what Gerry Skelton says around there being 5 core social work values, and that includes respect, acceptance, honesty, truth, and trust. So if we start with respect, which is absolutely fundamental, that means really that people are entitled to respect because they are a human being. So as such, they are intrinsically valuable. That means that people should be treated with compassion and fairness despite their context that they're living in, their background, their choices. They're valuable because they're a human and we should treat them as such. Everyone in life is seeking approval, and if we're sort of condemning people can pick that up very quickly and easily. In terms of social work, it's about sort of human rights-based work. So it's really key that we understand these values and that we're putting them to practice using our principles. So our principles are how we put these values into play. So if we consider a key principle, that might be integrity. So that's about doing the right thing even when no one's watching. So I wanted to unpack this with an example which really resonated with me and reminded me of my purpose for why I came into social work in the first place, despite working within, the systemic pressures that we have, time restraints, like workload issues where we have a high level of paperwork. When you really feel like you're doing the work that you came into social work to do. And I think what really stands out to me is when I'm standing up for social justice and equality and diversity and things like that, which are all principles of social work which come from sort of value-based work. So there was someone that I was supporting where he was looking to get into employment and education, even though there was substantial safeguarding concerns which I was involved with, and he just expressed clearly that despite everything else and the stress going on in his life, all he cared about was making some friends and getting a job, just wanted a normal life. And there was a lot of people, sort of professionals involved and charitable organisations which were shutting that down. And I, at the time, had been on some training around making safeguarding personal, which emphasised sort of that we need to be very careful that we're not actually making people's lives worse. We need to be ethical in our approach. And that doesn't mean sort of stamping all over someone's priorities and what matters to them. It means actually working with people, considering what's important to them and trying to work in partnership to actually make that happen. So I pushed him forward to this charity, put in a referral. I had a couple of support workers helping actually with this. Straight away, worker went round to his property. The referral was closed down and I couldn't understand why. So upon gathering further information, it appeared that the worker had actually gone into the property, and because of the context of it being so chaotic, there being so many concerns, the environment being very, very heavily sort of hoarded and in a poor state, they made a judgment about all of that, the worker, and he was said to have no potential for employment or training. So if you think about that, he had not been respected. He'd sort of, a judgment had been made very harshly about his ability. And this was someone who was at the beginning really of their working life, someone with disabilities, and needed someone to believe in him. So I challenged that and I managed to get him accepted by the charity, and it ended up in him absolutely thriving and getting into education and getting a job, all the things he wanted. But had I not have challenged that, he wouldn't have had that opportunity. And actually reading some of the words that had been said about him could have been deeply impactful and taken him away from his confidence in himself and what he wanted to achieve. And I think in that circumstance, it was like they weren't willing to invest in this person because someone felt uncomfortable by sort of hit the context in which he was living in. But it's not for us to make that sort of call. Like, we need to be actually working with people and giving them a step up despite all of these barriers. And I think if you really are taking that view that you're like treating people fairly, you can cut through those barriers. But people often make harsh judgments about people, they condemn them, and social work is about making judgments. So it's not that we're like non-judgmental entirely, and that's something that can be confusing. We are there to make judgments. That might be a judgment about whether the person's being cared for effectively by their family, but we're not there to condemn people. We're not there to treat them unfairly. We have to be very balanced in our approach. If you go back to the values again and you consider about acceptance, we are there to accept people with their intrinsic value, but we can still condemn their own behaviours as well. It's not that we can't make judgments about what they're doing as people. Like if they're acting in an appalling way, like they're saying something that's racist, as a professional, you can point that out and say that that's unacceptable behaviour. Or if they're treating someone else in a bad way, obviously you have to consider that. And that's still value-based work. And we are dealing with really, really challenging and conflicting situations, but that's why it's so important that you sort of build your value base and your principles and you hang on to them despite all of the pressures. And I think that really brings you back to the core of what you're doing.